Hello, 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 and welcome back to Bree Speaks podcast. I am your host, Bree Speaks, and today we are getting into the patriarchy. What is it? How is it harmful? Why is it unnatural? How religion perpetuates the patriarchy, how race is intertwined in the patriarchy, and why we should go to a matriarchal society and why men should be okay with letting women run the show. All right, let's get into it. So first, what is the patriarchy? I feel like it's a word that's thrown around all the time in pop culture, but let's give ourselves a true and real definition. Patriarchy is a social system which men hold primary power and predominate in roles of political leadership, moral authority, social privilege, and control of property. The term literally means rule of the father. So let's just stop there, because I know a lot of kind of controversy to this opinion, or a lot of pushback to this opinion, is that while men are, it's not a patriarchy because women hold the buying power. Like, statistics say that most money is spent by women, even though it's made by men. I know this is a point that Candace Owens, isn't that her name? Yeah, Candace Owens, the black lady who is Republican and weird, that she makes against the fact that we're not a patriarchy, is that women do most of the spending while men make the money. And her point is she would rather spend the money than make the money. So we're not a patriarchy. Women have the buying power. That is that. But by definition, if men hold primary power in predominant roles of political leadership, moral authority, social privilege, and control of property, then we are in a patriarchy. And thus, we are in a patriarchy. Men are I think 60, not even 70, like most leadership seats held by men, most moral authority seats, and that is the head of all the churches. So all the popes, all the priests, all the pastors, all the deacons, all the ushers, all the bishops, men. Social privilege. So whenever someone just, looks at a man, especially if he's a married man, right? Because if you're familiar with my social hierarchies, we know that the privilege comes in whenever a man is married. Then he's automatically seen in a social setting as this good man, as this righteous man, as this reliable, dependable man who's just worthy of all the praise because he has a wife and a kid, even though we know that men with wives and kids, for example, Donald Trump, are terrible, awful, terrible people. Or I was just looking at Love is Blind, and that season with that man who said he didn't have children, or he had said he gave children, but they were through the donation system. It turns out, no, he was lying. Like, the men lie. We know that men who are married, they lie and they cheat all the time. Just because you're married doesn't make you a good person. Just because you have a kid, that does not make you a good person. And actually, men are the highest perpetuators of child harm in a schmexual way in all of the world. So having a child doesn't make you a good person. Having a wife doesn't make you a good person. But the social privilege is, if you are a man, especially one with a woman and a child, then you are good to go. And then control of property. We know that men hold the vast majority of property control. I quote unquote property because you can't own property. You can't own the world. You can't own the earth. The earth was already here before human beings. So it's just that concept is just truly weird to me. But anyways, for the context of the world that we live in, where most people identify with the fact that you can own property, these mostly men do quote unquote own this property. So we are in a patriarchy. And just to all, refute the fact of what Candace Owens said, she feels like if you have the buying power, then you have the most power. And the issue with that is twofold. One, that's not true. Women are relegated to the house. So we have to, buy groceries for the house, buy clothes for the house, buy stuff for the kids. Women, because they don't, first of all, women have been relegated to the house because they have been like legally unable to work for a very long period of time up until recently, legally unable to vote, legally unable to own power, legally unable to own a bank account. So we weren't able to own or have our own money for a very long time. And so we are still kind of dealing with remnants of that. And then also living in a patriarchal world where society feels like men are, quote unquote, the head of the household and that women are supposed to just like spend their money. It's just, I don't know, at that point that women have they spend the most money, that does not mean that they actually have the most power, if that makes sense. Like women can buy stuff for the house, but that doesn't mean that her husband won't come and especially if he's the quote unquote breadwinner, that he can't come and cut her off from all of those finances and do with that money what he wants to. And we see that again and over again, where men essentially spend the mortgage money on gambling or on their addictions or whatever else is going on women or whatever. Like men, they still ultimately have the final control. And so while women may do the spending, at the end of the day, the final decision comes from the man. And that is a patriarchal society. That is what patriarchy is. That is how we are in a patriarchy. And that is how, despite what some may say, we are not in a society that is, run by women, especially as it pertains to like creating laws. Like women, like when you poll across women, it's like 90% of women believe that women should have access to abortion. But we just lost that right from the federal level. Who voted for that? It wasn't women. It just wasn't women. So to say that is ridiculous. And then how is it harmful? How is it harmful to have a patriarchal male-dominated society? It is harmful in a multitude of ways, y'all. It's just like, where do I even want to start? All right, let's just start with male-centeredness. Let's start with males, like the way the world is centered around men. You're always going to hear me talk about the media because the media is the largest tool for brain control, for mind control in the entire planet. What people see influences their minds. And so I'm always like thinking about how media is affecting and shaping the perspective of the people. And so when we're looking at, like the vast majority of superheroes, for instance, they're mostly men. It's just all media is mostly men as the main character. And then women are like the love interest. Or if the woman is the main character, her job is to go find a man. And so because of that, we are always looking at things from this male-centered goodness in the media. And that influences the way that we as people, especially women, like how we interact with men. We interact with men often from the stance of these are, good people, especially when we're younger. As we get older, we start to get hip to what's actually happening. And then that's also why the media tells people to not listen to old women who don't have husbands because they're bitter. Or anyways, they try to discredit older wise women from the very beginning so that older wise women don't influence or negate the brain control, the mind control that the media puts into younger women about men. Because, if all women knew the truth about men and the life of being a married person, then women, as they have been doing, would not want to go and get married. So just training people in general. Okay, let's break them up. Training women to believe that men are good, inherently good, and they always want to have their best interests in mind the vast majority of the time, while on the same hand telling men that they are the prize. But not only that, but I don't know how to explain it. I'm doing a poor job of explaining, but the way media trains people to view men and the way media trains men to view themselves, it is harmful to the biological makeup to men and women. So what do I mean by that? Men are supposed to pursue women, right? And I think that's something we all can agree on. Like, a good example, I feel like it's like the peacock is a very easy one. Whenever there's a male of any species, they are supposed to peacock. They're supposed to show off their physical assets that show that they will be a good and worthy partner to reproduce with. But the men, so the men are supposed to bring to the table that they've got good genes, right? And the women is supposed to select them. The women is supposed to choose them. The women is supposed to be the barrier to reproductive success. Like women are supposed to choose the best male to reproduce with. It is not supposed to be men are choosing the woman to reproduce with. That is naturally backwards. And it's naturally backwards because men in general, and this is again across all species, I'm not even just talking about human men, So males in general, they want to reproduce, period. Like they just want to reproduce because it doesn't have, they don't, there's no biological cost for men to reproduce. But for women there is. And so because we have that cost, which is, risking our lives, we have to grow this child, we have to put ourselves in a vulnerable position. We can't be as fast and as strong as we are. We have to, go through hormone fluctuations. We have to nurse after that child is born. We have to ensure that child is fed. Like there's so much that a woman has to do in order to, raise a child or raise her offspring, that men are not responsible for. Like the man is not responsible for breastfeeding. He can't be. The male is not responsible for raising a child in his womb. He can't be. And so for all females of all species, we have to have a very intentional decision-making process about choosing a mate that will not harm us, and in fact, a mate that will help us through the reproductive process. And so it is literally our God-given right to choose a person to do that with. But the way the patriarchy has perverted the reproductive selection process, it has made it so that men are essentially the ones doing the choosing. Men have all of the reproductive power whenever you have a social system that has placed it so that men have the resources, men have like access to the things that you need for reproductive safety. And so we as women are now put in this predicament, especially before we could own our bank accounts and stuff like that, where we almost had to like basically pick like any man that chose us, we were the lucky ones, because if we didn't have a man in our proximity, be it our father at first and then our partner as we grew older, we would be at risk of, of starving or dying or not having not being able to survive because we didn't have a man, because the way the system has been created. But you see how that is harmful, because so it doesn't matter if a man has reproductive good genes because they are in the position of power, so they get to pick the woman. And so we women had to reproduce with any man, no matter if they were awful, if they were abusive, if they were, big, fat, old, and stinky. We had to reproduce with them because they had the money. And that is not good for, evolutionarily speaking, that is not good for society. And I guess there are going to be some men who are like, oh, well, what about if the woman has bad genes or what have you? And research has recently come out that just shows that women are reproductively resilient. Like, again, the patriarchy has pushed all these darn lies. And so all this time, it's always been like, oh, women have a biological clock. But research has come out saying that actually, no, men are the ones with the biological clock. Like women, we develop our eggs when we are 5 weeks in utero. So when you are 5 to 6 weeks in your mom's womb, you are I hope that makes sense. If your mom gets pregnant with you as a woman, when you are 5 weeks in development in your mom's stomach, your eggs are being developed, or I think they're developed. I don't know if they're fully developed by 5 weeks or if they're starting to develop by 5 weeks, but they are developing around 5 weeks. And because of that, we have a biological mechanism / a biological system that was created to ensure the safe storage and passage of our eggs throughout our lifetime. Our eggs are literally evolved to survive from essentially from almost the moment we're conceived to the moment we go through menopause. Our eggs are good to go for that entire time, with the exception of obviously if we do things to destroy our bodies. Drugs, alcohol, etc. But men, they are constantly creating new swimmers every time they empty the tank. Every time they enter the tank, they are making new swimmers. And so the mechanisms, the machinery that makes those new swimmers, that machinery gets old as the male gets older. That machinery gets worse as the male doesn't exercise or doesn't, smokes or drinks or doesn't take care of their body. And then also just because of age in itself, the machines that make the swimmers and the swimmers themselves are more susceptible to DNA poor reproduction. That's not the right word, but your DNA, as you keep reproducing, it gets worse. I don't want to pull out my biology degree, but the more susceptible your DNA is to mistakes whenever it's being replicated during the DNA replication process. And that happens to men all the time. And so it's been shown that when women have miscarriages, it is not because the woman is having issues in her womb, but it is because these swimmers from the male are being rejected from the woman's body. The woman saying like, this is not good DNA. This is not good, strong, stock. And so we are not going to move forward with dealing with this. It's like eating poison and you throw it up. That is what women's wombs are doing. And all this time we've been told that if you are not able to reproduce and you're having miscarriages, it's because of you, the woman. But no, it's actually been because the men are old and they're greasy and they don't take care of themselves. So, okay, so yeah, all of that to say, it's just like, but all this time we've been being made to marry these old, greasy, sometimes fat, sometimes like most times not taking care of themselves men, because the kings are, these big fat slobs, but they have all the money. And it's like, it's not good for evolutionarily speaking. Like those are weak genes. Like nobody wants these weak genes. And then the women have been punished if they can't reproduce, or especially, it's a little side tangent, but I hate that women have been punished for not being able to give birth to a male heir. But women always have the X gene, and then it's up to the male, the swimmer, to bring the Y or the X gene. And the Y, is the if XY gives you a male, XX gives you a female. And every time a woman in the past has had a daughter, they always blame the woman for having a daughter when actually it's the male's fault. That always got on my nerves. But anyways, so that is like evolutionarily speaking why it's harmful. It puts women in a place where they are not allowed to select the most fit partner. And they just kind of have to settle with whatever they get. And that's never going to be good for any species ever. So that's why it's unnatural. I think I have some research here as well before we move on to religion and Christianity. Prehistoric evidence says that in hunter-gatherer societies, anthropological and archaeological evidence suggests that early human societies were likely relatively egalitarian. These nomadic societies, the fluid nature of resources and lack of concentrated private property made it difficult for one sex to dominate the other. There is evidence that both men and women participated in hunting, gathering, and tool making and childcare. So egalitarian is also, it's like, it's essentially like, it's like not matriarchy, not patriarchy, but both, like equalitarian, if you will. And so we also look at primate, like look at nature and then look at our closest cousins and look at how they're viewing themselves. And our two closest cousins are chimpanzees and bonobos. And chimpanzees are patriarchal and have aggressive societal, like they favor aggression, but then are also equally closest cousin, the bonobos. And if you don't know who the bonobos are, I feel like I'm a descendant of a bonobo personally. But they are known for their matriarchal social structures where female-to-female alliances and social bonds limit male dominance. And the same thing, elephants do this and orcas do this. It's like women essentially like gather in groups, and if a male gets out of line, they work together to banish him from the group. So there is evidence in nature that from our very close relatives and just a lot of species across nature have women, like female-led societies. Okay, so that is that. Oh, and then, okay, also, we want to talk about the rise of the patriarchy, because again, the patriarchy humans have not always been like this. Humans have not always been all hail men are the greatest, men are the best, woo 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 men, and that don't even make no sense. But evidence shows that the development of widespread patriarchal structures was generally linked to social and technological shifts that happened around 10,000 years ago. And this was correlated with the agricultural revolution, which created a surplus of resources and the concept of private property, land, livestock, and stored food. So when we were hunter-gatherers, essentially, whenever we would hunter and gather in a certain place and all the food would be gone, we would, move and then go somewhere else. And then we would move and go somewhere else, which is a better and more sustainable way to live because we allow the environment to grow back naturally instead of farming, which when farming came along, you would clear out whatever land was there and you plant whatever you want to plant. And then you keep using that land over and over and over and over again till that soil has no more resources. So I'm not a big fan of farming personally. I feel like we should be able to graze the land, find what we can, eat what we can, live off of the land, and then move on. Just more sustainable. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. But once we figured out how to farm and we figured out, okay, I want to keep this land is fertile, this land creates, good crops. I want to stay here and I want this to be mine. That is when there was a need for formal systems of inheritance or passing down property through All right, I'm gonna tell you my theory and then I'll read this and that'll help. I believe it was, and I know it was in some places, women took property was passed down from mother to daughter to mother to daughter because of the fact that whenever a woman has a child, you always know who that child's mother is. Like there's literally no doubt about it. And so if a woman had a daughter and then she would have a daughter and then she would have a daughter, like again, there's no question in our lineage. But if a woman has a son, and that land went to that son, that if that son then is owning the land and then he, impregnates a woman and then that woman has a child, that child is supposed to go to that child is supposed to be the heir to the land, but it's like technically that child could be that father's child or it could be someone else's. You never know. Like technically you can know, in which it's harder to know. And now with technology you can know, but before the technology existed, it was very difficult to identify if a child was the child of a man or not, or a different man, but you would never have doubts about a woman. So it is like logistically easier to pass down property from woman to woman to woman. But because of, men wanting to take charge, the inheritance systems, and so here's my little research, the inheritance systems, when they started doing patriarchal descent, which is wealth passed down through the male line, it required a greater control of women's sexuality to ensure, quote unquote, legitimate male heirs. And so, as societies grew and accumulated wealth, organized warfare and defense became more important. The male advantage in physical strength was leveraged in combat, helping men gain control over resources and political power. So it was like they wanted to keep land that, again, wasn't theirs. It belongs to the community and to the earth. And because men were the ones who were fighting over this land using their male strength, they wanted to be able to claim that land as theirs, and then they wanted to be able to pass it on to their male heir. And in order to ensure that a male heir was their own, that's when we start having marriages. That's when we start having women be this is when the oppression of women come in because we want to be able to control who the heir, like control who you're sleeping with, control women's sexuality. And then we start demonizing women's sexuality, say, oh, if you sleep with more than one person, you are an slut, or you're a terrible person, or a Jezebel, or and their religion is coming up. So all these things start happening so that women are demonized for sleeping with more than one person, because men wanted to control that reproductive system so that they can ensure that they have a male heir, so that they can keep control of the property, of the resources. All right, so that is that. That is kind of like the history of patriarchy, what it is, why it's harmful, why it's unnatural. And then where does religion come into this? All right, so let's talk about religion. Religions, the Abrahamic religion specifically, this is Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. They all push the patriarchy, which is my biggest issue with them. And not only do they all push the patriarchy, they push the patriarchy in a narcissistic way. And, we can refer to my narcissistic hierarchies of control. But when I say in a narcissistic way, the way that narcissists implement their control is through taking truths and manipulating them to their own benefit. While the narcissists don't lie outright, like sometimes they do, but a lot of times they will take something that is partially true and manipulate it so that it doesn't reflect the actual truth anymore, but the truth is still there. And so what do I mean by that? When I look at just like these religions, they take things and they make it so that the population of people who are following these religions, they listen to the words that the Bible is saying, or the Torah or the Quran, but the people who are leading the religions, they don't actually apply to them, if that makes sense. Or the people who are leading these religions, they don't adhere to the words of these books, but they enforce it upon the congregation. And these books, they take words that are true and they mold them and manipulate them into a version of the truth that is harmful to people, but you won't know it's harmful because it sounds like the truth. Okay, I think that's my explanation. All right, so let me give you an example. Okay, let's say that men are the protectors and the providers. I think that's a good one, and that, is what upholds the patriarchy, even though it makes no sense. But men are inherently, on average, bigger and stronger than women. That is a fact. That is a true fact. And so they take that and they make it so that that being big and strong and fast, like they take the physical attributes that are in men's favor and they uplift them to this standard of, oh my gosh, this is the best thing in the whole wide world. And then they judge everyone on those standards. And then obviously, on average, for the general most part, women are not going to meet those standards because we're women and we're smaller. But then they not only raise the things that are in men's favor to a higher standard and then praise men for being able to meet the standard that was made for them. They use those same standards and then say, because these are the standards of the world and because men can meet them, they are the divine rulers of the world. So because they're like, they pretend like being big and strong is just like a naturally important thing. And then because men are big and strong, they say like men are the naturally most important thing. Does that make sense? And so it's just like, and they say, oh, because men are big and strong, because people need to be protected and provided for, right? And the people who have to protect have to be big and strong, which is not true. Then the men are the protectors and the providers because they're big and strong. So it's just like, and it's like, that's the thing is, that's not true. They literally take the characteristics of women that are in favor of women. So things like women are better at balance, women are better at flexibility, women are better at aiming. Women tend to have better like accuracy than men. That's why you always see women in movies do, we have the bow and arrow. It's like, the thing that women, well, even though you have the Green Arrow, he has a big bow and arrow, but a lot of like, Katniss Everdeen, and I don't know, there's a lot of women with bow and arrows in different, various capacities. But yeah, so women also have a lot more endurance. Like a lot of ultra marathon winners are women. But instead of raising those things, like why isn't it that, having extremely good accuracy is raised to the standard of like the most important thing? Or why isn't it that being the most flexible is raised, it's not raised to the most important thing? Or why isn't it that having the best balance is being, yeah, we have women like women in gymnastics, but and yeah, and I will say, and because gymnastics is more about balance and flexibility and accuracy when it comes to, twisting yourself in the air and then landing back down in a specific way, women's gymnastics is more popularized than men's gymnastics. But we don't have any other sports that are like if you look at across like all the Olympics, it's all about like, the Usain Bolts, like who can be the fastest, like, who's the biggest weightlifter, like who is biggest, fastest, strongest, who can throw the farthest javelin, who can throw the biggest ball. Like there are multiple sports. So, basketball, who's the tallest, football, who can knock someone over. Like there are a conglomerate of sports that are not only catered to men's positive attributes, but those sports are also like fueled more, funneled more, like popularized more, like they're uplifted more, like all of that stuff. Like figure skating, obviously that's balance, that's accuracy, that's flexibility, but like ice skating is not raised to the same standard as like NFL or like soccer. Even soccer, women are better at soccer because again, that's a lot of endurance and a lot of accuracy, a lot of aiming, but because they're not, big, fast, and strong, even though they are big, like they are fast and strong, but it's just like they'll never be bigger and faster. Like the most big, fast, and strong women in the world are not going to be as big, fast, and strong as the biggest, fastest, strongest men in the world. But the most flexible men in the world are never going to be as flexible as the most flexible women in the world. And then when it comes to like shooting and accuracy, women, there was one time where women were in the same shooting competition as men, and a woman won, and then they separated the sport. They separated it from gender, and then made it so that the measurements were different so that you can never compare head to head the women's performance from the men's performance. Like what is that? It's like, what is that? Like, it's like there are things that women can beat men in, but men literally ensure that women do not have the opportunity to do that, so that people won't be able to see it. And they do the same thing with race, which is, it's a whole nother thing. But white people will ensure that Black people cannot compete with them in the same way in a lot of different capacities, so that they have the justification of saying, yeah, look, Black people can't do this, Black people can't do that. And it's like, we could if we were given the same opportunity. Like, and we see that all the time. Honestly, we see all the time the top person in any not even just like sports, but like in academics, like whenever you allow Black people to have the same training and exposure and opportunities as white people, we rise to the exact same standard. Like, or, in sports that are white dominated, right? Like tennis, you get the Venus and Serenas whenever a Black person is actually given the proper training and opportunity. You get the Tiger Woods, even though he's a little anti-Black, so I don't really like him too much. He's still a Black person who was allowed into a white dominated space, and then boom, he became Tiger Woods. It's like no matter what, if you allow Black people in to if you give Black people an equal, and women, here's the thing, if you give women and Black people the same starting line as men and white people, women and Black people will typically go further. Will typically go further and do better. Like, that is what it is. And if that is, you can blame that on social pressures, because women feel like and Black people feel like we know that we have to do 2 times as hard to get half of what they got, that there is this like evolutionary pressure on Black people and women to do better. But like, I don't know. I feel like there's also, and this is white people are gonna call me racist. I'm just like, maybe racist or sexist. But I think there like, it could be there. I'm just saying there could be a biological component. But but the thing is that there is, when it comes to like athletics, there are different body compositions that have evolved over time. Like Samoans, right? They have a more, what is it called, like a more metamorphic or something like that. Like they hold fat more, and so they can get to bigger sizes, like just like they can have bigger fat stores just genetically. And so they have like sumo wrestling and stuff like that, versus growing up in a African, a hot climate that required, like, in Ethiopia, for instance, they have a higher altitude, and so like their like oxygen intake is better, and that's why like some of the best long distance runners are Ethiopians and Kenyans, because it's like they've adapted this certain system that is helpful for that. And then I think it's an endomorph. It's like endomorph, metamorph. Anyways, and then there's a different body type that is more muscular in nature. And Black people from Africa specifically have that. It's like a higher muscle tone. It's just like, that is a biological thing. And so, and then Europeans, they have, I don't know, I'm sure they got something else. I'm sure Europeans have developed some physical attribute that is helpful for them in some sort of way. I just don't know what it is. But yeah, so there is like a biological component to being more athletic than others. Some races being more athletic than other races. And then with women, I think women are, and I was saying, I think it's just, again, statistically speaking, when it comes to like testing, like there's science and proof that women are smarter than men, especially when it comes to just like certain stuff. I don't know so here, let me see if I can find something. In what ways are women typically smarter than men? I know in leadership, that's an easy one. Like across all measurements of leadership, women are typically better. But based on decades of cognitive research, women typically show an average advantage in several specific verbal, memory, and social cognition skills, while overall general intelligence is comparable between sexes. So yeah, verbal and language, memory processing, social and emotional, women are smarter. Okay, so I'm saying, what about men? And just, and I'm just like looking at this, and who do I want? Who do I want to be a leader? Someone with good verbal and language skills. Who do I want? Someone with a good memory and processing, someone who can remember what happened, and so they can make better decisions and avoid mistakes in the future. It says women are better with perceptual speed and accuracy. Females often demonstrate small advantages in tasks requiring quick and accurate identification of visual stimuli, as well as fine motor coordination, which again goes to that shooting, like quick and accuracy, like we're good at looking at stuff like that. Whereas it says men are typically at an advantage for spatial and rotational skills. So men tend to be better at tasks involving disembedding a simple shape from a complex background, mathematical reasoning, high end. Although boys and girls are similar in math throughout elementary and middle school, men are statistically more likely to score at a very high end of complex mathematical reasoning tests. Systematizing, men are typically score higher on tests of systematizing, which is the drive to analyze, explore, and construct systems. Such as mathematical, mechanical, abstract, or rule-based structures. So it's just like men love structure, they love rules, and you see that with all these men, like men joining the military. We are chaotic good. That's what I think. That's what I always call us. Like women are not good with like following rules that don't make sense, following rules that are harmful. Whenever I look back at history when it comes to like the enslavement of Black women specifically, there was a higher propensity of revolt on a plantation that had more women than men. And then also, whenever Black people were being kidnapped across the transatlantic slave trade, if the boat was full of women or had like a large degree of women to men, there was a higher likelihood of revolt on that boat. It's like if you put a bunch of women together and we don't like something, we're going to stand up, we're going to say something. We're not going to just and say, oh well, this is how it is. Versus men are much more likely to do that. They are much more likely to follow the rules of authority because it's quote unquote because it's authority. So anyways, how did I get here? I'm not sure. Back to religion. So religion, it promotes the idea that, that's how I got here. It promotes the idea that the characteristics of a man are good. And because the characteristics of a man are good, it means that they are the ones who should be the natural leaders of the human race. And that is just untrue. Like everything that is about the biological makeup of a woman, from how we have to forward plan with raising children, resource plan, we have our verbal and language skills. Women probably evolved the ability to talk before men. The way that we have better memory and processing, the way we can remember things and learn from our mistakes, the way we have better emotional control. We do. Like men are such emotional creatures. Women I feel like women express their emotions more often, possibly in a more diverse range of ways. So while a woman will be happy, will be sad, will cry, will be anxious, will be angry, will, be mellow, like women we allow ourselves to experience a broader range of emotion. Men, they condense their emotions into one, which is just anger, and they don't express it like in its most raw and natural state. They just kind of bottle it up and then wait till anything makes them upset, rather it's sad or happy or anxious or literally any emotion. They just express it as anger. And because their emotions are often bottled, they come out in times that are inappropriate, and then it comes out in a way that is harmful to everyone else. And then men are socialized to not see women specifically as like human beings. And so they have this sense of entitlement. The patriarchy creates this sense of entitlement to men. Like men feel so entitled to a woman that if the woman does not like give him what she wants, then you get rape, then you get murder, then you get all of this violence against women that we see all across the world. And the patriarchy and Christianity, like and these Abrahamic religions, they allow that. They encourage men to be the controller of their household. They encourage men that, your woman is your own to do what you will. Your woman and your child is yours to do what you will across in your house. Like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, they make men tiny little kings of their tiny little king house, their tiny little house castle. And the woman and the children in the house are their servants, essentially. And if you do not serve me, the man king, in my tiny little castle house, then you will suffer the consequences. And it allows that, and it encourages it even. And it's just like that is harmful to all women everywhere. And it is the reason why we have such high volumes of violence against women across the planet, is because these religions, specifically Islam and Christianity, I'm not as familiar with Judaism, but I know it's an Abrahamic religion, so I'm putting it in there. They encourage that. And that makes me think about a lot of Black men say, oh, patriarchy doesn't benefit Black men. And, it doesn't benefit Black men in America as much, but it does, because whenever it's, intra-racial issues, like Black on Black, a Black woman versus a Black man within a community, within the Black community, that man is going to be upheld. Oh, that man is going to be believed. Oh, that woman. You know how many Black girls are assaulted by uncles and dads and stepdads, and no one ever believes them, no one ever helps them, and in fact the girl is like kicked out of the house and told to be quiet, or like, oh, you shouldn't even bring that up. Like, the amount of silence that Black women and girls are faced with in order to protect Black men in the community is preposterous. That is those men benefiting from the patriarchy, benefiting from the social privilege that is being a man, that you can hurt and harm young girls. As long as they're within your own race, you can hurt and harm young girls and you will be believed. And especially if you've done anything to make yourself like this pillar of society. Like, again, the pastors across races are gross. The pastors and all the men in the church are nasty. And it's like, again, like that is because the church puts men on this pedestal of like this deity like standard, like these gods that cannot be touched because they are men and they are the rulers of the household. That I feel like religious men are the worst ones. They are the worst perpetuators of violence against women and girls, and they are not held to not held accountable because they are religious. I hate that so much. And yeah, so Black men like to say that, the patriarchy doesn't help them, but it sure does. As long as you don't hurt or harm a white woman, then you're good to go. As long as you hurt and harm a Black girl, you're fine. Like, it's so gross, and I hate that that's a thing, but it's true. And then, I like to look at, if you look across like Muslim countries, violence against women there is very bad. And it's like women, like Black men like to think that if they were in charge, right, and if they had the power that white men have instead of the white men, that they would do something better, or like things would be different. But that is what you see in Islamic states, is you see men of color, right? So mostly probably like, Arab, like, the Iraqs, the Irans, Pakistan, quote unquote, the Middle East, but they are Islamic, and they, some of them have, Sri Lanka law, the law of Islam, as a legal system. And it is men of color who live under Islam, and they are hurting and harming women left and right. It's just like, if you want, like, it's the same thing. It is the same thing. It's just with a different color face on, with a different color man, in front. But it's the same thing. And this is why all across the globe, we need to put women in charge. And that is why men in charge, it does not matter. Like, and then you look at, and when I think about capitalism, that's one of my 4 horses of the apocalypse. The 4 horses of the apocalypse are capitalism, patriarchy, racism, and religion. And then narcissism as a honorable 5th, because narcissism is the creator of all 4 of these. But when you look at communism, people say, because, I hate capitalism sucks. And people say, what's better? And then I'm like, communism. And they're like, oh, but when you look at communism, look at Cuba, look at China, look at all these leaders, look at all these communist societies that have hurt and harmed the people who they were governing, because all the power was centralized into the government. And my reaction is, that's because men were in charge. That is because men were running this communist government. Communism will never work if men are in charge, because men like to hoard power, and they like to exact their power, or like execute their power, and like show power. Like, they like to have power in order to show that they are bigger than other men. And they do that by hurting and harming people. And that is all across the globe. Until we can get a society that is largely run by women. I'm not saying that men will never have a seat at the table, but like the way right now, it's like 80% men and 20% women. That needs to be flipped. And actually, in ancient African societies, they said the ratio was 4-3. I'm like, which is, for every 4 women in leadership, there can be 3 men. For every 3 men in leadership, there needs to be 4 women. And I'm like, that is like the minimum in my eyes. That is like the minimum. I think it really should be, maybe like a 5-2 situation. I think 5-2 feels good, but 4-3 feels, maybe a little more fair. But either way, societies are never going to work if men are in charge, because men, their priorities are just different. Their priorities are always going to be accumulating wealth, creating structure, ensuring that they have more than another man. Because, like, again, biologically, they are wired to show off and show off in a way that shows that they are better than other men. And if having money is the way that we can show off that we are better than other men, then, or like that they can show off that they are better than other men, they are going to do things to accumulate more money. And if it's having power is what, like, they can do to show off that they are better than other men, then they're going to accumulate power. Like, it doesn't matter what it is, whatever the like desired thing is in society. Like, it could be to have the most tomatoes. Like, that's what it is. Like, it's like, in some cultures, it's like, it's goats. Like, you can go, like, then a man is going to accumulate the most goats. Like, no matter what it is, a man is going to try to accumulate the most of it so that they can show off that they have all this power. So unless women are in charge to mitigate that behavior, to punish that behavior, to demonize that behavior, men will continue to accumulate and hoard resources and harm and exact power over everyone else, just as a show that they are that nigga, and that's that. So, all right, that is a long episode. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed learning about the patriarchy today and why it's harmful for white people, Black people, and everyone in between. If you enjoy this and you want to hear more from me, you can always find me on TikTok at Bree.speaks. If you're listening to this on YouTube, you can find me on Spotify at Bree Speaks Podcast. And if you would like to have your own copy of my Narcissistic Hierarchies of Social Control, Narcissistic Social Hierarchies of Control, you can find that at free2adhd.com. That's FREETOADHD.com under Social Hierarchies of Control. You'll see it there. Thank you for listening and for coming. I hope you learned something and found this interesting. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.